Welcome to the Ancient Art of Modern Warfare. I'm Christopher Mayer, Colonel, U.S. Cavalry Retired. These podcasts address what I think every citizen should know about war, peace, and everything in between. If you've been with me thus far, congratulations. You're about to graduate. Over the next few episodes, I'll summarize what this podcast series was intended to do, the key takeaways from the past 5 years and more than 100 episodes, and what you can do with this information. If you haven't been with me through all of these, stay with me through these wrap-up episodes, and then go back to listen to the episodes that cover the parts that seem most interesting to you. I'm going to start with a little of my background and why I thought that investing my time in producing these podcasts was important. First, I describe myself as a cavalry officer. Now, in the modern U.S. Army, the cavalry no longer rides horses. You may think that this isn't necessary to say, but you might be surprised. Today, the mission of the cavalry is the same as it was when we did have horses. This includes reconnaissance, finding out where the enemy is, using our combat power to stir the hornet's nest a little to see what the enemy is about to do, or strip him of his own reconnaissance forces. Conversely, cavalry protects our main force against enemy reconnaissance and probes. We do this from tanks, armored personnel carriers, or dedicated reconnaissance vehicles and helicopters, always supported by artillery and working closely with the U.S. Air Force. Most of my time in the cavalry was in Cold War Germany. As I rose in rank, I worked less and less with tanks and more in areas that made use of my experience. This included time working on the future of the U.S. Army, its equipment, organizations, and tactics. This led me into acquisition and program management. Another part of my service included being an instructor for the U.S. Army's Command and General Staff College and the Naval War College, and, after my retirement, I spent some time as faculty at the U.S. Army's War College. In and around all of that, I trained young soldiers and units getting ready for combat. I deployed into combat myself a couple of times and served as a peacekeeper with the United Nations in Africa. In what might seem unusual for a cavalry officer, I wound up being Chief of Staff for the reconstruction of Iraq, and even more strangely, the Department of Defense and U.S. government's technical expert on private military and security companies. In this role, I wound up representing the U.S. government in negotiations and diplomatic initiatives regarding armed contractors on the battlefield. The longer time I spent doing these things, the more I became frustrated that we seemed to get into armed conflicts without any real plan, without any firm concept about why we were there or what we intended to achieve by it. This frustration was not directed towards our uniformed leaders. Our military operations are well planned, led, and executed, but they seem disconnected from any clear policy or end state. Policy and end state are the responsibilities of our civilian leaders, as it should be. The civilian leaders tell the military where to go, what to do, and, to a degree that is sometimes important but often unhelpful, how to do it. As soldiers, we provide our civilian leaders with our best military advice. This advice, however, is often at odds with the civilian leaders' own vision or political imperatives. Now, they are under no obligation to follow that military advice, and that can sometimes be a good thing. On the other hand, the military must always follow the directives given by those civilian leaders, as it should be, insofar as those directives are lawful anyway, also as it should be. Here in the United States, we live in a representative republic founded under democratic ideals. This means that whatever decisions those civilian leaders make, they are accountable to the people who, either directly or indirectly, elected them to govern. The people, therefore, have a responsibility to elect wise leaders and to hold them accountable for decisions that run counter to our principles, values, or common sense. Many of our friends and allies have similar governments, and that is why I do these podcasts. My intent is to give you, the people, the fundamental knowledge about war that the people need to understand the many conflicts around us, those that directly involved us, and those that don't, or don't seem to help you make informed decisions in electing wise political leaders, and then to hold those political leaders accountable for their decisions about war, peace, and the very many things that seem to fall somewhere in between. You may say that you don't really care about war, that you don't like war, and we should never get into another war. You may say that it is too complex to understand, and you will leave that to others. Another take on that might be that we never learn from war, and so there's nothing useful we can learn about it. My counter to these is that war is a consequence of fallen human nature. It has been with us as long as human beings have been able to organize themselves into communities, and will continue to exist until all things pass. Although war is never desirable, it is sometimes necessary, especially when we are attacked. Although war is complex, the fundamentals of war, or the nature of war, remains unchanging, and war is, as Clausewitz wrote, really very simple. This is why I call this podcast The Ancient Art of Modern Warfare. The substance of war is unchanging, while the specific characteristics change with technology and culture. If you are a citizen of a republic, you have a responsibility to hold your elected leaders accountable for their actions, and no action is more serious or, as Sun Tzu said, more important to the survival of a state than war. Therefore, as he also said, the study of war should not be neglected. And that is what I have tried to do in these series, to explain war to you so that you can prudently exercise your responsibility as citizens of a republic. In the next few episodes, I will summarize the key takeaway from this series from the Ancient Art of Modern Warfare. These include that war is an act of violence to compel the enemy to do our will, and if the enemy is to be coerced, you must put him into a position that is even more unpleasant than the sacrifice you call on him to make. Therefore, you must determine that pressure point, the event that will cause him so much pain that he will submit. But remember that the results of any war may not be final. Second, that war is a human endeavor, that despite advances in technology and weaponry, war is fought by human beings, and human nature does not change. This is reflected in the unchanging nature of war throughout the millennia. Then, war is an instrument of national policy. As Clausewitz wrote, it is a continuation of policy with the addition of other means. Therefore, it is important to know what that policy is, why war is necessary to that policy, and what the nation intends to achieve by that war before embarking upon it. It follows, then, that the use of force in war must be consistent with the aims of that policy. Not all wars have the policy objective of overthrowing the enemy. Next, the only acceptable purpose of war is to bring about a more just and sustainable peace. But peace after war depends upon justice in going to war and justice in the conduct of war, being feared but not hated, addressing the root causes of the war, and justice after war, establishing or re-establishing justice. Finally, to understand that real war rarely recognizes all of these essential elements. With that, please come back for the next episode, summarizing what war is and how it is unchanging, here on the Ancient Art of Modern Warfare.